certain subjects come up quite a bit in the last few weeks. And it's been joy. We've talked about joy a lot lately. Talked about having the joy of the Lord. I think it's a couple of weeks ago, we read John 15:11. Says, "These things I've spoken to you, that my joy may remain in you, and that your joy may be full." So we talked about how it's not our joy, but it's His joy. So Wednesday night, those of you that was here, we had kind of a intimate time. And there's just a handful of us sitting in folding chairs in a circle outside, and we just talked. And through that, I realized that I'm not the only one going through stuff. Not only am I not the only one, but everybody's going through pretty much the same thing. So this scripture's been on my mind since Wednesday night. And we may just do a short teaching. Not sure where it'll go, but this is what's been on my heart. And so if you got your Bible, go to Psalm chapter 1. Psalm 1. So I'm going to read the whole chapter, then we'll go through and read it in the Passion also in a few minutes. But it says, "Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf also shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish." So, upon doing some research into Psalm 1, I found out that there's actually a group of several biblical scholars that believe that Ezra is the one that compiled the psalm together and put it all in one place, all in one book. I hadn't heard that before until I found this, and I found a lot of scholars feel the same way, a lot of theologians. And they believe that Ezra wrote Psalm 1 as an introduction to all the Psalms. Is that true? I don't know. That's just what one group of people believe. But Psalm 1 starts out with the word blessed. And the word blessed is the Hebrew word esher, and it means happiness. Or it actually, in the Strong's, it says how happy with an exclamation point. So it's like it's an announcement. How happy. So we talked a lot about the difference between joy and happiness, and do you have the joy of the Lord? But today I'm going to ask a different question. Are you happy? Are you happy? Are you happy with where you're at? Are you happy with where things are going? We know that joy comes from God, so joy will never leave. Joy will always be there. But I don't want to stop there. I want to be happy. I think that's pretty much the desire of everybody, to be happy, right? There's an example that I always use to explain happiness and joy, and I know I've preached it here 30 times. I know I have. But there's something in that never really struck me as concrete as maybe it should have. And the example I heard from Pastor Brother Adrian Rogers, y'all remember Adrian Rogers? Used to preach on 91.7. It was either Turning Point or Love Worth Finding. I don't remember which one it was. Love Worth Finding, Adrian Rogers. So he gave this example, and I've said it here many times. I'll say it again just for reference sake. He says that happiness is like a thermometer, that it's based upon the circumstances around it. Joy is like a thermostat. It controls the circumstances around it. We said that all the time, to differentiate happiness from joy. The part that never really struck me as hard as I think it should have is that joy controls the circumstances around it. That happiness is the thermometer, joy is the thermostat. The joy that comes from the Lord controls the circumstance. So, you control whether you're happy or not. I have complete control on whether I'm happy or not. So if I'm going through a phase or a season where I'm just not happy, I'm in control of whether I'm happy or not. In complete control. Because the thing that God gives me controls whether I'm happy or not, right? So I can go to this thermostat. It's not up here anymore. It's back there. Terry could stand up and go to that thermostat, and he could turn it way, way, way down, and the thermometer would reflect what he set the thermostat at, right? So if you dwell and abide in the joy of the Lord, then it will affect where your happiness level is. Too many times I think that we get the idea, maybe not the idea, maybe too many times we have the mindset that joy is something afar off that we are in pursuit of. But you control your own happiness, regardless of what's going on around you. I typed this past week. I have no right to sit freezing, blaming the things around me for my coldness when I have access to a thermostat. If I'm sitting next to the thermostat, I have no right to sit here miserable, freezing. That's asinine, like the highest level of stupidity. But that's what I do. That's not what I do, it's where I've been. But this is what the first psalm is about. It's literally giving you the recipe for happiness. It's telling you how to be happy. So it starts out, blessed is the man who walks in the counsel of the ungodly. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. So verse 1 starts out with 3 things to abstain from or to avoid if you want to be happy. If you want to be happy, don't do these things. Now, I'll say this. We always say that your Christianity, your relationship with God should not be a list of rules and regulations and do's and don't do's. But this is pretty straightforward. This is pretty straightforward saying, listen, if you want to be happy, this is some things you need to stay away from. Okay, so the first thing is, if you read it the way it translates, it says, how happy is the one who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly. How happy is he who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly. So counsel is the Hebrew word etzah, and it means advice, plan, or purpose. Advice, plan, or purpose. Ungodly means, in Strong's it said morally wrong. So upon doing some research, Abin Ezra, I had never heard of him until this week, but Abin Ezra was one of the most distinguished Jewish biblical commentators and philosophers of the Middle Ages. So it's like, what, around 1100s, right? Middle Ages? Somewhere around in there. Listen, if y'all don't know either, you can't prove me wrong. So it's somewhere in that area, the Middle Ages. He was one of the most distinguished Jewish biblical commentators. And he said this about this verse. This was his commentary about this verse. The word ungodly, he says, the restless who are never at one stay. Those who are unsettled, they aim at no certain end and walk by no certain rule. Literally, those who walk without purpose. We hear ungodly and we think, okay, the sinners who's out here acting wild and crazy and living a heathen lifestyle. Abin Ezra says ungodly is literally those who are walking without purpose. So remember, the word counsel could be translated advice, plan, or purpose. So it could be read, how happy is the man who walks not in the purpose of those who walk without purpose. How happy is the man who walks not in the purpose of those who walk without purpose. Benson commentary says this: these ungodly may indeed be moral in their conduct toward their fellow creatures and outwardly unblameable, but live without due regard to God. So let me be clear. This verse does not say that we avoid these people at all costs and we cast them away and shun them. It's not what it says. It says not to walk in their counsel or purpose. I don't know why, but God's like keeping me here. I'm not allowed to walk around. To completely avoid or shun those goes against everything Jesus taught us. To completely avoid or shun the ungodly goes against everything Jesus taught us. If we locked ourselves in a community with only believers, we'd never impact the world at all, and thus never further the kingdom. Right? So this is not saying that you can't be friends with, hang out with, or be connected to the ungodly. It's not what this is saying. What this is saying is, if you want to be truly happy, you be careful who you allow to speak into your life. If you want to be truly happy, you be on guard on who's speaking into your life. Not all advice is good advice. I wrote this, a kingdom man can be connected with a worldly man. A kingdom man can be connected with a worldly man. The thing is, at the end of the day, the worldly man should look more like the kingdom and not the kingdom man looking more like the world. That sounded pretty wild. I come up with that by myself. Well, it wasn't by myself. I'll take that back. I was proud of that one. I thought about putting it in bold in my notes. A kingdom man can be connected with a worldly man. Thing is, the worldly man should look more like the kingdom at the end of the day instead of the kingdom man looking more like the world. Here's the problem. In this day and time, going to church regularly is not a very good measuring rod on whether somebody is godly or not. It's hard to look at someone and determine whether they are a godly person based upon church attendance. And here's the reason. It's because oftentimes you'll find more morality and compassion from those who would carry the label of ungodly than you would from many people sitting in a church pew this morning. And that's hard to say. I'm not one that likes to get up here and bash other religions and other churches. It hurts. It hurts to know that there's people that's claiming to be something, but in no way show any effects of what they're claiming. So where do we go from? If I can't look at you and say, okay, well, you're a member of such and such church, you got to be a kingdom person. If that's not a good measuring rod, what is? How do I know if I'm receiving counsel from someone who's godly or ungodly? What's a good measuring stick to measure that against? And God led me here, and as soon as He did, it was like the light come on. And it's John 13:35, and it says, "By this all will know that you're my disciples." Excuse me. By this one thing, the world will know you're my disciples, if you have love for one another. A love that goes beyond smiling to your face at church and never thinking about you again the rest of the week. A love that goes beyond being friendly on social media but stabbing you. I mean, this is stuff that's going on in churches. Jesus said that the world will know you're my disciples. The world will know you're one of mine by the way you love each other. So, not to be too harsh, but I don't care how many churches somebody's pastored, I don't care how many boards they sit on. If you don't hear love in their voice and see compassion in their eyes, you can put them in the column of ungodly. If you want to know what my prayer's been for the last 3 or 4 months, there's a song we used to sing, more love, more power, more of you in my life. It's been my prayer. Be watchful who you allow to speak into your life. Because I can guarantee you this, if they're not speaking life into your life, they're speaking death into your life. If someone you're allowing to help shape you isn't propelling you toward Jesus, they're pulling you away. Like I said, I'm not saying you can't be connected with them, but don't let their hands be the potter's hands with you on the wheel. The second part of verse 1 says, nor stands in the path of the sinners. Happy is the man who doesn't stand in the path of sinners. Stand is the Hebrew word amad, and it means to stand, abide, dwell, remain, serve, or tarry. Not tarry with an E, like back in the back. It's tarry with an A. I'll just make sure y'all still with me. To stand, abide, dwell, remain, serve, or tarry. The path is the Hebrew word derek. I'm sure it's not pronounced like that, but it's spelled like Derek. A road as trodden, figuratively a path of life. So basically what this is saying, if you want to be happy, you can't remain in a sinning lifestyle. Now I know this isn't typical of what we hear on a Sunday morning from here. But once you've known the goodness of God, once you've experienced His Spirit, I'm going to tell you right now, it is impossible for you to be happy in sin. It's impossible. You can look for happiness, you can look for joy, you can look all you want to, but you will not find it as long as sin is there. Sin is missing the mark. We know that. In the Greek, it's the word hamartia, hamartia. I'm not sure how you pronounce that. I've never heard it correctly, I guess. But it's an archery term, and it means to miss the mark. If I'm missing the mark, I'm unhappy. Whether that means living in sin, flirting with sin, dabbling in sin, or trying to see how close I can get to sin without sinning. All of it leads to unhappiness. Anybody heard of Rich Mullins? He wrote a lot of the early praise and worship songs that we have, like in the 90s praise and worship songs. Rich Mullins. And he made a comment one time, made a quote, and a lot of people don't like it, but it's him being real. He says, I don't want to sin, I just want to be tempted real good. People they don't want to fall into sin, but they want to see how close they can get. They'll flirt with the line. It's like a 2-year-old if you've ever raised one. They will test the boundaries. Constantly testing the boundaries. But it all leads to unhappiness. I can say and search and pursue what I want, but at the end of the day, no, it's fine. I usually stare at you while you're in the front, but you back here, so I got to keep turning around to you. Penny's got my back. I can live life of devotion. I can spend all my hours in the secret place, but if I'm still dabbling and living in sin, I'm not going to find happiness. I'm not. It's just... Now, there's a difference in, okay, I messed up and this happened, and I'm continuing to... Because it says, those who stand in the path of sinners. Remember, stand meant to abide, to dwell, to remain, to tarry, with an A. Y'all get that joke, like Terry? Okay, I'll just make... I was just making sure. Okay. The third part of that is, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. Now, I'm going to be honest. We don't use the word scornful a lot nowadays. Like, I don't even remember my grandma saying scornful. So I had a hard time with this, knowing what this meant. But here's an interesting thing, is when you read it in the Hebrew, it'll actually confuse you more. Because, well, I'll just say this. I'll read this first. There's a book called Ellicott's Commentary for English Readers, and it translates the word scornful as mocker or imposter. Strong's Concordance translates it as to make mouths at, or that is to scoff, hence from the effort to pronounce a foreign language to interpret. Anybody else confused? I was confused. If you look up other places this word is used in the Hebrew, first place it'll take you is Genesis 42, and it says this, "And they knew not that Joseph understood them, for he spoke unto them by an interpreter." And it's that word interpreter. It's the same word translated here as scornful. Ellicott translated it as the imposter. I asked Siri what an imposter was. This is what she told me in a British accent. A person who pretends to be someone else in order to deceive others, especially for fraudulent gain. Now think about an interpreter. Tries to play both sides. I can say this with the utmost certainty, because this describes how I lived my life for a long time. You cannot be happy as long as you're having to live a life of pretending. I know that. That one hits home. Because I can tell you this, it doesn't matter how many trips you take to the altar and try to pray it gone. If you're not willing to put that mask down, you'll never find happiness. If you're trying to fake it till you make it, you're miserable. I can guarantee it. Kind of like that guy from the Men's Warehouse. Y'all remember that commercial? That guy had that real raspy voice. I loved his voice, but he always said the stupidest thing. He always said, "You're going to like the way you look. I guarantee it." Y'all remember that? What a stupid guarantee. Your suit's not going to fix my face. Anybody else ever think of that? That's a stupid guarantee. I'm telling you, if you're trying to live life with a mask on, you're not going to like the way you look. I guarantee it. I wish I had his voice. The simple fact that you feel like you have to pretend to be something else is a huge announcement that you're not who you're supposed to be. The simple fact that you feel like you have to pretend to be something you're not. I wasn't meaning that towards you. Sorry. The simple fact that you feel like you have to pretend that you're something that you're not is a huge announcement that you're not who you're supposed to be. And like I said, this one hits home for me. Because I know what it feels like to get stuck in that revolving door of I'm not who I say I am. I'm not who I'm supposed to be. I've wore the mask for so long, I don't know how to take it off now. I don't even remember who the real me is anymore. Which leads to more pretending. Which leads to deeper into the persona of not who I really am. Which brings you right back around to more pretending. I don't know how to take the mask off at this point. This will make you miserable. How happy is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. Verse 1 tells us if we want to experience true happiness, we must not do them three things. Allow those with no purpose to determine our purpose, abide in sin, or live a life of pretending. It's pretty good advice. It's pretty good advice. Verse 2 says this, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and his law he meditates day and night. His delight. Whose delight? Happy man. We're still talking about happy man. Happy, happy, happy. So delight is a Hebrew word that I'm not even going to try to pronounce. It looks like chefetz. It means pleasure, hence desire, concretely a valuable thing. A valuable thing. The happy man finds his delight and places value in the law of the Lord. What is the law of the Lord? If you look it up in the Strong's, it'll tell you it's the Decalogue or the Pentateuch. Decalogue being 10 is Deca. That's being the 10 Commandments. Pentateuch, Penta 5, that's the first 5 books of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. The law of the Lord. I'm going to be honest, I feel like that's kind of a narrow-minded definition. Because I believe the law of the Lord goes so much broader than just the 10 Commandments or the first 5 books of the Bible. I believe that the law of the Lord is anything spoken by Yahweh. Anything He speaks is law. Because it's truth. It's absolute truth. Anything that proceeds out of the mouth of God is His law. Anything. So when He calls you child, it's His law that you act like child. So let's put verses 1 and 2 together. Think of it this way. Just have a little fun. The ungodly is giving advice, trying to shape who you are. At the same time, the voice of God is speaking truth, trying to shape who you are. One will lead to happiness. One will lead to a feeling of being unfulfilled. Remember what delight meant, a valuable thing. So whichever word you place valuable in your heart determines whether you'll be happy or not. Isn't that basic? I thought about this as I was walking up here. My water bottle says simple truth, and that's exactly what this whole message is. It's very simple. Simple truth. You got a voice that's not God's, that wants to try to shape who you are. And you got God's voice trying to shape who you are. Whichever one you place value on determines whether you'll be happy or not. Do I place value on what He's saying about me? Or do I place value on what the enemy's saying about me? Do I place value on His purpose for my life? Or do I place value on John Doe's value and purpose for my life? The second thing, abiding in sin will leave you unhappy. Verse 1, pleasure comes from the law of the Lord. Verse 2. Living a life of an imposter leaves you unhappy in verse 1. The law of the Lord reveals who you really are. Verse 2. Everything He says is His law. Second part of that verse is in His law He meditates day and night. Meditate means to ponder, to imagine, or to dream. Happiness comes from allowing my dreams to be shaped by His dreams. Meditate means to dwell, to ponder. And this, to me, is such a clear truth. Happiness comes from not dwelling on the lies of the enemy or even what your natural eyes tell you about a situation, but happiness comes from pondering on the truth that Yahweh speaks into your life. We talked about that Wednesday night. If you meditate on all the things that's going wrong, I can assure you, you will be unhappy. If you dwell and ponder on what He's saying about you, how happy is the man, is what the verse says. Verse 3 says, He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf also shall not wither. Whatever he does shall prosper. How many of you feel like right now in your life, everything you've put your hand to has prospered? The happy man, the man that, and you can't really even split these verses up because it all goes together. The happy man is the man that doesn't take his counsel from ungodly and doesn't stand in the way of sinners and is not living a life of pretending, but instead he's meditating day and night on the truth that God is speaking. That man shall be like a tree that's planted by rivers of water. Why do they always use that analogy? The tree planted by the river of water. Because that tree's constant. Because I don't know that much about agriculture, but from what I've researched, the tree that's planted by the river is not as dependent on whether the rain falls or not, because it gets its nourishment from the river. The river brings down things all in the current, and it gets in the soil and the roots, and and eats the soil, and the tree grows, and the green grass grows all around. So the tree is not as dependent on what falls. It gets its nourishment from what flows. Awesome example of that is the children of Israel was in the wilderness. Every day they had to wait for the manna to fall. Every day had to wait for the manna to fall. He said, I'm taking you to a land that flows with milk and honey. I'm taking you to a place where you're not going to be dependent on, is it going to fall today or is it not going to fall today? You're going to be just nourished in a constant flow. And I've heard that preached about revival and the Spirit of God. Because we come into church on a Sunday morning and we act like whether the Spirit falls or not is like whether we're going to hit the lottery or not. Did we get our numbers right or did we not? We're called to live in a place where I'm not wondering, is it going to fall today or is it not going to fall today? I'm called to live in a place where it flows constantly. That tree is constant. That tree's strong. Never wavering. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf also shall not wither. Whatever he does shall prosper. I know y'all have heard me say this before, but that's don't throw maters at me yet. But that bring forth its fruit in its season is actually a bad translation in both the King James and the New King James. I don't know what other versions it says that in, but because it really doesn't go with the next part of the verse. Bring forth his fruit in his season, his leaf also shall not wither. If his leaf is not withering, that means he brings forth fruit in every season, regardless of the season. Brian Simmons in the Passion Translation he translates it like this. They will be standing firm like a flourishing tree planted by God's design, deeply rooted by the brooks of bliss, bearing fruit in every season of their life. They are never dry, never fainting, ever blessed, ever prosperous. Brings forth fruit in every season. So I preached a message about 3 years ago about living a life not in seasons. Do y'all remember that? I may have said that wrong. I don't think we're meant to live in a life without seasons. I think we're meant to live a life that's not susceptible to seasons. Why is that? Because if I've got the feeling that if I'm living in God, I'll never have to go through a winter, what happens when I go through a winter? I begin to question who I am, what I am, and where I am. See, I don't think we was ever meant to live a life without season. We was meant to live a life not susceptible to season, which means even if it is winter, we'll still produce fruit. Because here's the thing about seasons. We could be going through the best season of our life, and one bad day, one bad situation, one bad circumstance, one bad thing come and completely knock us off our rocker. I looked this. It actually took a while to find this. I looked this up. In 2014, the month of July broke most weather pattern records. With a high in the lower 50s and a low in the upper 30s, it was recorded as the coolest summer weeks in history for the plains in the Southwest, around here. 2014. We went for like a week in July in the 50s. Does that mean you can legally call it winter? We think, just because I've went through a few bad days, now I'm in a season in my life that I just have to try to bear through it. It was still July. Swimming pools were still open. May not have been a good idea to go. It's still summer. See, the problem is that I allow a certain circumstance or a certain stream of bad events to now tell me what my season is. Only one can control the seasons for me in my spiritual walk. Is this making sense? So I don't want to get stuck in this thing of I had a cold day, therefore I'm in a winter, and it's going to be another 3 months before I can drag myself out of this. I think the first problem with that is anytime I allow my circumstance to tell me where I'm in trouble already. The happy man is constant, strong, planted like a tree planted by rivers of water, bringing forth fruit in every season. His leaf will not wither. Whatever he does shall prosper. How does he get to that point? He legit does verses 1 and 2. He doesn't allow ungodly advice to tell him who he does not allow any voice besides God's to tell him who he is. We'll put it that way. No matter whose voice it is. If it ain't his, you don't need to be listening to it. He does not allow himself to get stuck in abiding in a lifestyle of sin. Listen, if that spirit inside of you is telling you, stay away, it's not just doing that to keep you held down. I don't know. Listen, I know this may be groundbreaking for some of us, but the Spirit of God wants you to be happy. Like legit. More than anything, He wants you to be happy. I can't remember who said it. The glory of God is man fully alive. You fully alive, being alive, is the glory of God. He wants you to be happy. He's not going to tell you, abstain from that just because I want to keep you under my thumb. I've used this example before. I don't make Haley hold my hand in a parking lot because I don't want her to have fun and run. I do it so she don't get hit by a car. I said I wasn't going to go here. Listen, I'll get into it real quick and we'll jump right back out. Here recently, I heard a teaching, and it was about divine restriction. Through God's restriction on our life, He literally propels us. And here's the question that was raised. If God didn't want Adam and Eve to eat of the tree, why did He put it in the garden? Why put a tree in the garden that they're not allowed to eat from? Because giving them restrictions, literally, it's like putting your thumb over the end of the water hose. By restricting it, you can literally reach further. By God putting restrictions on our life, He's literally keeping us in the place where we can reach further than if we just went wild. Does that make sense? So why does He tell you if you want to be happy, you got to abstain from sin? It's because He's saying, listen, if I can restrict you in this way, I can literally propel you a lot further than you'd ever get on your own. Happy is the man who does not have to live a life of pretending. Happy is the man who can be free to be me in every aspect. I don't have to be this person here and be this person somewhere else, and then when I get here, make sure that I put the right mask on because I don't want to accidentally let these people see this face. And see how confusing that sounds? You ought to try to live it. It sucks. I'll just be honest. True happiness, the happy man's delight is in everything. Listen, Jesus said it Himself. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. That's what you live by. Whenever you meditate and ponder on what He said, both in His book, both what He's spoken to you. Listen, if He's spoken something to you 2 years ago, go back and revisit it. Go back and revisit what what He has spoken into your life. Then you will be that constant, strong, never wavering, always prosperous, and don't get narrow-minded on the always prosperous either. That doesn't mean that I'm going to have to carry 2 checkbooks because one of them's too big. But I am still praying for that, so if y'all want to help me pray for that, well, worldly prosperity only goes so far. Spiritual prosperity literally is eternal. So, wherever you're at this morning, I'm going to go back to my first question. Are you happy? Are you happy? If not, let's start by looking here. Let's look here. How long has it been since we carved out some time and just meditated on what God said? Because I promise you, that'll lead to happiness. Because His voice is not the one saying, you're terrible, you're horrible, you stink. You should really try something else because you're blowing this. Are you happy? I know we don't do this very much anymore, but I am going to ask them to come get us a song. And whatever you need. If you need to come pray, you come pray. If you need to stand and worship, you stand and worship. If you need to run, you run. If you need to cry, you cry. Just know this, that if you find yourself in a winter season, in a season that's tough and it's hard, it has no authority over you. It can't determine who you are. Your season does not determine who you are. I know that, and I'll just go there. I know Wednesday night that a lot of people said the same thing. It just kind of feels like we're stale and stagnant and kind of sitting still. And how many of you immediately, whenever you go through that season, the first thing you think of is, what have I done to get me here? How have I messed this up this bad? If I can't do no better than this, I'll just quit. Your season does not determine who you are. Because let me tell you something. When you go through those times, whenever you feel like you're not hearing, you're not feeling, you're not seeing what you was seeing, I'm not experiencing what I was experiencing, the first thing the enemy will try to tell you is, you've done it. You've caused this, you blew it. Trust me, if that's really the case, Holy Spirit will show you that. But Holy Spirit will never show you in a way that'll keep you down and try to condemn you. Holy Spirit will always show you in a way that's lifting you back toward Him. Here's what I don't want to happen. And I say this with extreme conviction because this is how it normally works within me. You get to that place to where you feel stagnant and you feel stale and you start believing the lie that